Hello, Alison. Thank you for coming and spending some time talking to me about your journey that you've had with long COVID. Would you mind just introducing yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're doing at the moment.
Of course, yeah. So my name is Alison. I'm an occupational therapist. I work with people with long COVID and other conditions, and I am currently doing the SERPA training.
Great. And
So
Circus training is stress illness recovery practitioner.
yes,
So working a sort of mind-body medicine, linking together the mind and the body and the impact of stress on the body.
yes,
So you've been on a bit of a journey with this yourself. So tell us what your life was like before you had COVID.
yes. So I had COVID in March 2020. Before that, I just started working in a new job. So I'd been there about 4.5 months, having previously been made or taken voluntary redundancy from a job that I'd been in for quite a while. So I felt like I was at a bit of a career crossroads. For some context there, but otherwise, things seemed to be chugging along okay. I'd had a virus at Christmas 2019, which had felt like a bit of a different virus, but in terms of the way it affected what I can now see, it affected my autonomic system a little bit, but I recovered, in what you'd call the normal amount of time. Um, and then again, looking back, I could see I was a little bit in health anxiety mode because I was having some episodes of feeling dizzy when I was exercising. Nothing extreme, and certainly no fainting or anything like that. But I'd gone to the doctors about that, and I'd had that on my mind. So that was the context.
Mm, mm. So that was all before you actually got COVID.
Yes.
Yeah. And then when did you get COVID and what was that like?
So yeah, March 2020, just was it just before lockdown or yeah, just before lockdown. But we'd been sent home, as in to work from home, that week. And I think it was at the end of that first week, it's the 20th of March, I always remember. I had my first symptom, which was a sore throat, but I didn't necessarily think much of it. I thought possibly could be, but let's see what pans out. Um, and then I felt a little bit of tightness in my chest that second day, and the third day, I felt like, okay, I'm ill now. So I had that similar experience to what I'd had with the first virus, where I think that was my low blood pressure now. So I had this experience where I got up, ran downstairs, and suddenly felt very faint and like I needed to lie down, be on the floor. And then after that, I started to feel like I couldn't breathe properly. So I had to, really just lie down, calm down. And at that point, I thought, okay, this feels different. This is unpleasant. Um, but the next few days weren't as bad, and I thought, "Oh, okay, I seem to be on the mend." But then day 7, bang, hit me again. I just sort of felt like almost like it had a resurgence, which I think seems to be or was quite common in those early days
Yeah, it
for
was.
the original COVID strain. And I had a temperature again. I felt very dizzy, lightheaded, and yeah, that followed. What followed was the worst week of illness I've ever experienced in my life. Um, and of course, I lived on my own, so I was all alone. I couldn't have anybody come in and help me, of course. There was lots of, narratives about illness and death going on in the news all day, every day. It was, of course, lots of uncertainty, and the lockdown had been implemented during that time. And I think towards the end is when Boris Johnson became ill as well. So, it was just surreal, really, looking back at it. And it was very, well, very scary and very isolating. And as I say, you just don't know what's happening because you feel very unwell, and you cannot get to a doctor. They don't want to see you either, your GP. So you're trying to navigate this whilst keeping yourself well, as you can be, because I also had terrible fatigue. I absolutely was breathless and dizzy, just feeling, doing the basics to kind of feed myself, water myself, and get to bed and try and get up in the morning, and just have some sense that I'm kind of doing okay. But that's about all I could manage, really.
Mm. And did you have so we weren't testing in March 2020. Did you have a sort of antibody test afterwards? Have you had confirmation that you definitely had COVID around that time?
Yeah, well, I did do an antibody test in I think it must have been the following year, and I had antibodies from a natural infection and the vaccination at the time.
Yeah. So you've had evidence that you've had COVID at some point.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So then how did the symptoms progress? How long were you unwell for?
Ooh, about 15 days. And I could see the exact trajectory where the acute infection had ended, because at the end of the 16th day, I woke up. I still felt, not great, but it was quite a marked difference, because I always felt the worst in the mornings. I had to just very slowly sit up, because again, I can see now, autonomic function was massively affected. So, I really got low blood pressure overnight. So sitting up, I had to do that very slowly because my heart would start racing and I feel quite unwell, and also my breathing. But then at that point, I'd been on the phone to the doctor, I think, on the GP every day that second week, because I just wanted someone to speak to know how ill I was feeling. And they actually rang me an ambulance twice, because they could hear that my speech was affected by, the breathlessness. It was affecting my speech at that point. So the first time the ambulance came, and they didn't find anything wrong with my SATs or anything else, so they kind of left me. And then I spoke to the GP again the next day, and they said, well, you're still very breathless, so I'd like you to be seen by a doctor. So they asked the ambulance to take me into A&E. So I did, and that was the last day, actually, where I felt acutely unwell. They checked me over, and although I felt wretched, they couldn't see anything that would require a hospital admission, gladly.
And then how long were you unwell for altogether? So that was the acute side of things, and then symptoms obviously lingered. And how long did that go on for?
So the fatigue that I had was just under a year.
Mm-hmm.
So it was when I started using, well, I'll come to the mind-body techniques, and the fatigue lifted pretty quickly. So that was around the year point. And then other symptoms took a bit longer. And then I also had a reinfection in October 2021, which brought a couple back again. But then they subsided. So it's hard to give an exact figure, but I say in terms of it affecting my functioning to the degree that it did, quite significantly, about a year. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And could you work during that year?
I had about 4.5 months off work, the initial stage, because I felt like maybe I could go back to work around a couple of months in, but then I had a real decline again, and I did end up admitted to hospital just for a couple of nights to test and observe, because the breathlessness came back quite badly again, and they did see that my oxygen was desaturating on that occasion on exertion. So I was off 4 months, 4.5 months in total, and then I went back on a very gradual phased return. But I didn't. So in that job, I didn't ever get back to full time that I was doing. I was doing around 20 hours working from home. And then I decided to get a new job in the midst of all this, which, looking back, wasn't the best decision, but I did it anyway. And I had a month off to try and prepare for that, and I ended up going or starting this new job, overdoing it with the fatigue, and being redeployed So again, working from home part-time. So it was only once the fatigue had gone that I was able to go back to my normal role frontline as an OT.
And so during this time, were you given any medical diagnoses, or did you have any investigations and they found a physical cause for the symptoms that you're experiencing?
No, they never found any pathophysiological cause. I had blood tests, I had X-ray and a CT scan of my lungs, the usual that we've all experienced, that there's nothing showing. So the only time that there was any evidence something going on was when they realized I was desaturating when I exerted myself during that brief period when it came back again, the breathlessness. But other than that, no, there's never been any biological marker.
And where are you at now in terms of symptoms? Have you fully recovered? Are you still on this healing journey?
I definitely consider myself recovered, yeah, because especially when I look back now, I've been functioning at a normal rate and pace for a long time, really. So yeah, I'd say since sort of April 2021 or thereabouts. As I say, I did have that second infection, which brought back some symptoms, which I now know was due to the emotional impact of it, because you still had to isolate again at that point. So I was on my own again, and all those kind of emotional experience and those very traumatizing memories of what it was like the first time very much came back. And the illness itself was very mild this time round. So I knew that illness couldn't cause what was going on in my body. I knew that I had a very clear instinct. This is the emotional impact of having this happen again. So again, a little bit of a setback, but I just used the same techniques again. And so I would say I feel like at this point, yeah, I've been well for a good year. The only thing I deal with daily is acid reflux, which is the bane of my life, but it's very mild. It's managed, and I know it is a mind body thing because when I'm relaxed and happy and distracted, I don't have it. So yeah, and I have confidence that will eventually go, but I can't call acid reflux by itself long COVID. Definitely not. I think the one thing that is that feels different, but I look at it actually as a positive these days, is that when I feel stressed, I get very clear physical signs that I'm stressed. But in a way, I feel that actually probably that's more that I'm very much more aware of them. I'm picking up those signals from my body. So, for example, I get the strange sort of internal vibration feeling, which I did have quite badly at the beginning of my illness. But again, it's mild. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't affect my function in any way. And I know what it is. I know it's harmful. And I just think, okay, perhaps I'm feeling a bit stressed at the moment. So I'm picking up on the messages that my body sends me. And actually, I feel that's a positive thing.
Yeah. And so you mentioned various tools. What did you do to help you get better?
So I knew, I already had a meditation habit, and I knew that kind of thing just helps with dealing with stress and sort of chilling you out more. And it's a good thing to be doing. So I'd kind of implemented a good meditation routine fairly early on. So I was doing that anyway. I was obviously pacing myself after having many an experience of post-exertional malaise, having overdone it, or my body perceiving that I'd overdone it. And I'd kind of been looking for all different ways, as you do, as everyone was in those early days, of how do you recover? How do you get better? I'd tried supplements. I'd tried, various things that were kind of going around the social media groups. Nothing had made any difference. I suppose I was quite stable in my energy baseline, but in many ways I was getting worse because my ability to go for a walk had much lessened. I'd got to the point where just a couple of minutes in, I'd start getting leg pains. So I just felt, I've definitely plateaued, and I don't really know how you get out of this cycle really. And then I think it was in one of the social media groups, somebody mentioned the Gupta program. So I did a bit of research, and I think you could sign up to a free trial where you had access to the first few modules, which were basically kind of explaining, what he thought was going on in the body and the brain. And when I listened to those, it was like, yeah, God, that makes so much sense. That is what is happening to me. And it was the only time I thought, or I truly felt that this rings a bell, this feels right, as an explanation, because he was kind of saying, that the virus is the original trigger, but then the brain gets caught in a bit of a loop, and your own responses, your thoughts, feelings, behaviors end up kind of reinforcing that loop. And symptoms become pathways in the brain, essentially. So therefore, I can influence those symptom pathways by how I consciously think, feel, behave, as well as, doing things, carrying on with the meditation, doing things to actively relax the system. I can break free of this loop. So I thought, yep, I'm going to try that. And literally within days, my fatigue had lifted. It was the strangest experience. I almost didn't believe it at first. I didn't want to tell anyone, because when you have fatigue, you're always waiting for it to get worse again. You've always got that fear at the back of your mind that, oh God, I'm going to overdone it, and I'm going to suffer for this. But that didn't happen. And it was brilliant. And within, I don't know, perhaps 5 days, I decided to take myself out. I took myself out for a 20-minute walk, which, as I mentioned, I could only manage a few minutes, no more than 5. Prior to that, I just used the techniques that he said, visualizing or redirecting my thoughts, the worry thoughts about this isn't good for me, or this is going to cause me more symptoms, redirected them on the way. But I already had a very positive feeling that this has worked. And then a few days after that, I went for a 40-minute walk, and I realized, yeah, I'm fine. I'm okay now. This is great.
Really?
It was amazing.
And can you summarize some of the techniques that you learned through the Gupta program?
Yeah, so you have to, first of all, become aware of all of the thoughts that you have around your illness, your symptoms, your ability to do things, your worries for the future. Bringing that awareness in, having understood the cause of what's happening in the body is the next step. So I wrote them all down, and I realized, my God, I spend a lot of time thinking and monitoring my body, and wondering, can I do this, or thinking about when I did that in the past, this is what happened, in a negative outcome kind of way. So that was very enlightening. So once I'd written them all down, the minute they then came into my head again, I'd pick them up. Okay, that's an illness thought. And in the Gupta program in particular, they sort of have you visualize, well, you first of all have to say a very clear, stop, I'm not going to have that thought. And you visualize yourself taking a different path. And you reinforce, this is a loop in the brain, that you choose health, you choose happiness, and you then bring yourself into a visualization of a memory of yourself feeling very, healthy, lots of vitality, a good memory basically, and you kind of flood your system with that feeling, that image, as if you're reliving it in a positive way. And so that was the method, along with sort of two meditations per day, which I was already kind of doing, so just increased that a bit. And that very, very quickly, worked for me in terms of my fatigue. so that was fab.
So then what were you? So the fatigue significantly improved. What about everything else? Were you better at that point, or was there more that you did then went on to do?
Yeah, so obviously fatigue is the most limiting symptom. So that's when I felt, okay, I can return to normal life. But yes, I was absolutely still dealing with lots of other symptoms. So light sensitivity and headaches. I had to wear, well, at one point I was wearing sunglasses all day long, but I'd kind of moved on to blue light glasses because, you know, you don't want to be going out in the world wearing sunglasses indoors. That's a bit embarrassing, but the blue light glasses worked quite well. And the acid reflux was worse at that time. And it's the kind where it affects the throat. So it's not the classic kind of heartburn. It affects the throat, makes you feel, well, initially it felt like a lump in the throat, and then it sort of gradually got better and better, but it feels like a very dry throat, or feel the need to clear your throat. Sometimes it affects your speech because of the, you know, it just feels like you need to cough. What else? Gosh, I had really bad insomnia at one point, but that really improved with the help of some medication along the way, but it kind of reset my sleeping pattern. I had noise sensitivity at one point, but that had already improved, gladly. Brain fog had improved along the way, and so that had gone. I was having sort of strange palpitations a lot of the time, but you know, nothing that was worrying me. It's just sometimes when I laid down, when I laid down at night, I just was very aware of my heart beating. It was a bit of a strange, unpleasant sensation. The internal vibrations, which is a very weird experience, but so many people know exactly what you're talking about when you say, "You ever had these with long COVID?" Yes, yeah. No doctor will recognize that symptom. Um, Gosh, I feel like there was a lot more, but I cannot remember them gladly because
That's okay. But what happened? What did you do? What did you do next?
what did I do next?
Yeah.
So when I oh, the dysfunctional breathing, of course, that was sort of, you know, not breathlessness per se, but just the awareness that my breathing pattern at times wasn't quite normal. So I went out into the world and I returned to, you know, normal life. So I went back to work and I realized I was feeling quite anxious, which was a new thing. Um, but again, looking back now, I know that's really common when you've had fatigue. You're in that, you know, freeze state. If we're looking at the polyvagal kind of theory of way of looking at things, so then you move into fight or flight a bit more. You're moving through the stages. So I was experiencing a lot of anxiety. But again, it wasn't letting me, it wasn't impeding me doing anything. It was just a new thing that I was like, okay, well, that's there. Um, so I had a really nice summer actually, because I turned 40 that year. So I was having such a nice time that I was feeling really quite well. But then because I came off my amitriptyline, the headaches came back with a bit of a bang. And so as I went into the autumn, I was feeling a bit less well. And then that's when I caught COVID again. And as I mentioned, had some more symptoms, such as the leg pains came back. I didn't have fatigue or dizziness. That was one that I'd had and that came back with the reinfection. And I very much I just felt a bit strange in my body. So again, I think it's probably the internal vibration has got a lot worse, and you just feel a bit. So I don't really know how to explain it, but you just feel a bit odd in your own body, very strange. So that was October. So at that point, I returned to my to the Gupta techniques. So in the background of all of that, although I was back to normal functioning, I was just very mindful that I didn't want to go full pelt. So I was still meditating every day. I made a promise to myself, I'm not going to be rushing around. I'm not going to be generally feeling like I have to do everything. So I guess I was still doing things at a slightly slower pace. or more mindful pace, shall we say. But again, so having had the reinfection, I decided to go back to the technique, and I was getting a bit better, but I think I was very much feeling very anxious again because of the experience of being, I can only describe it as being re-traumatized. My nervous system was hyper vigilant. The breathlessness had come back a bit as well. And at this point, the Omicron came along, and I suddenly became very, very hypervigilant of COVID once more. So I didn't feel great. I was working. I had 3 weeks off work for the second infection, but I went back to work as normal. So, it wasn't the same impact on function, but I just didn't feel particularly great physically or mentally, I think. So I ended up doing the lightning process not again, but it's the same kind of program in terms of the brain retraining. Now, I wholeheartedly believe in the lightning process, and I know it's had really great results for other people. But for me, I think looking back, it was the wrong decision to take, because it's the same kind of thing as Gupta. I was already starting to feel better using those Gupta techniques. And I think I did it out of a place of desperation, not thinking clearly. So again, I definitely think, and I know it works for many people, but for me, it didn't, I wasn't in the right mindset to take it on properly. And I was expecting or hoping for, attached myself to the outcome that everything else, all the other symptoms would immediately go. And, they didn't. And I just felt annoyed with myself for having gone through that process and made a bit of a rush decision, really. But yeah, so it wasn't right for me, that program. But I know, and as I say, I do believe in the techniques, and I know it's worked really well for others. So at this stage,
Can I just ask you a question before you? Could you summarize the difference between Gupta and lightning process? Is there a difference? If somebody was considering, do I do this, do I do that? Any thoughts on that?
I think perhaps the lightning process goes a bit more into perhaps the neuroscience of it than the Gupta does, which, depending on how you like to learn things or what slant you prefer, that might be better for some people. And I know, I have a friend who before this has used it for something different and experienced a very, very rapid improvement in her symptoms as well. So I think it has that ability to work very quickly for some people as well.
Yeah.
Definitely. So yeah, and perhaps it feels a bit more thorough, but then Gupta, I think, has got more of the side with the meditation and perhaps the more spiritual side, which definitely appeals to me. That's more my brain, I think. Well, I like both. So, they're similar in that they're both brain retraining programs, but perhaps a slightly different slant on how they present the information. So I guess I realized there was something missing, and at that point, I came across Nicole Sachs and her work and the concept of journal speak. I listened to some of her podcasts. She had a couple of interviews with people who'd used her journal speak to recover or improve a great deal from their long COVID symptoms, and it was all the different kind of long COVID symptoms. So they weren't just talking about fatigue, they were talking about strange heart rate and all these various things. And obviously her main focus is pain, isn't it? So I knew that it's the ability to address a whole range of symptoms that perhaps didn't feel like they'd been addressed by the other programs that I'd used. So I was keen to try that.
And so you went down that route. So you started listening to Nicole Sachs's podcast. And what does she suggest? What did you do different that was beyond what maybe Gupta or lightning process offered?
So the difference with those programs is the focus on the emotional impact, I think,
Mm.
and the ability of the nervous system to be affected by, past emotional experiences, and that it can still be triggering symptom pathways, and that hadn't really been covered, I didn't think, in the other programs. And it's free, which is great, because especially the lighting process in particular is quite expensive. So financial considerations are an important thing to consider for a lot of people. So it's accessible, it's easy, you do 20 minutes of journaling per day, and you talk about your emotions. That's something I feel quite comfortable with, and I'm very much on board with in terms of understanding, and absolutely endorsing the fact that past experiences can have an effect on your nervous system today. So again, was completely on board, and I started doing that. I did the 28-day challenge that she advises for people starting out, where you commit to doing a journaling session for 28 days in a row. And I started seeing huge improvements in lots of symptoms, including the acid reflux, the light sensitivity, the headaches. Again, that was a big one for me, because every single day, I had to wear those glasses, and I sometimes was taking paracetamol, and that was a huge one. And I knew that was mind body, because I had periods where I'd forget to wear them, or I'd forget that I had the symptom, because I was really involved in what I was doing. And the minute I remembered, the symptom came back. So I knew that was mind body. So all of these things started improving through doing the journaling, and the anxiety started improving as well. So I saw experienced firsthand how powerful that was. And yeah, I think it was after that, and the leg pains improved and went, and so the light sensitivity, headaches completely gone. So yeah, I think it was at that point, that's when I considered myself having become well, truly well, and recovered, I think.
Amazing. So any other tools that came out of Nicole Sachs and the work you did through her, what she offers for free?
Yes, so from there I kind of saw different people who are prominent in that field, and I started using the somatic tracking method, which I think is really, really helpful, in particular when sometimes I'd have a little twinge of the light sensitivity or the headaches coming back, because I think these things kind of come and go for a little while, and then they eventually fizzle out permanently. So when they did come back temporarily, I use the somatic tracking method, where you make sure you're kind of very relaxed in the body, you're being mindful of what you're thinking whilst you're experiencing the symptoms, so that you're giving the chance for your brain to interpret it as a safe thing, or not a harmful thing. So that was a really, really key technique for me.
Yeah.
And yeah, just listening to those of Dan Bulio, looking at different accounts. So Danny Fagan, her Instagram account is great, so useful, and just really immersing myself in it, really, and learning as much as I could, having that knowledge that really empowers you to understand what's going on in your body, that nothing harmful is happening. That's very, very empowering. And when I truly realized that and took that on board, realized there is nothing that I can do that is going to cause myself any physical harm. Therefore, all activities are safe. All of these symptoms are safe. I know that because I've had the tests, I've been given the medical check over. I know that there's nothing physically wrong with me, and I truly understand that from a mind-body perspective. So yeah, acquiring all of that knowledge, and truly just living life and going out there and knowing all these things and embodying it is finally what got me there, I think, and that long process of understanding myself better than I ever have before, really. So there's so many positive things that come out of all of this. So yeah, that's where you find me today.
And what do you think caused or contributed to you having long COVID in the first place?
I think definitely, being probably my nervous system, autonomic nervous system, being primed by the feeling of this doesn't feel right with the job that I was in. Finding my purpose is something that's really important to me as a life value. Also, the experience of that virus just before, and that background health anxiety that I had, which I'm not really, that's not really me generally. So, I don't know quite why that started, but I think all of that. And I think as well, I've realized that I'm somebody that's perhaps more prone in life to low mood, which manifests itself in fatigue or, low energy. So again, having a nervous system that perhaps defaults to that when things get rough, or, when times are more difficult or you're experiencing emotional stress. I think that's probably played a part as well. And just the fact that it was a very, very unusual time on a global scale. I think that's probably the number one factor, really.
Yeah.
And all the uncertainty and everybody sharing all these things about what's happening to them, their symptoms, and that I'm not getting any better. And you do take all of that on. Of course you do. And it's, no one knows what's wrong with you. It's really, it was pretty bad, really. So, that you got to be kind to yourself when you take all these things into account. But
So this is
yeah,
what we call it was a collective trauma that we have lived through.
absolutely.
And societal fear was huge. So if your
Yeah.
nervous system's already a little bit on the edge, a bit sensitive, and then you've got this societal go home, lock the door, don't go out, you're going to die. The sort of message that was put out there has a massive impact.
It does. It
And
does.
like you say, you're on your own as well, and
Yeah,
the impact
yeah,
of that.
yeah, hugely. And I think I remember, God, at the first, even when people went out for a walk, we wouldn't even walk near each other, would we? We'd give each other a wide berth in the street, in the open air, and you realise how crazy that is now. And I used to, run over all the items that I brought in from a shop with an antibacterial wipe. There was such paranoia about how you could become infected, how easily, and gosh, yeah, it was not a fun time. So I think all of those things, I'm not necessarily that person who's rushing around their whole lives and their body's been crying out to stop. I didn't feel like that person that is perhaps the classic fatigue personality type. So, I don't think you have to be that person, but absolutely, I think taking into account my more natural disposition to go to low energy, or, the Dorsa vagal state, with the fatigue and the low mood, and yes, coupled with everything, and I think generally my nervous system, I'm quite prone to vasovagal reactions through, heat or pain or things like that. So for whatever reason, I think that's just how I'm built.
Vasovagal, we mean a little bit fainty at times, and some people
Yeah.
are a little bit more on the fainty side.
Yeah.
Mhm. So if you had some key tips to offer people, or could you just summarize what are the key things that you did that made a difference, that has moved you on in this healing journey?
Yes, I think I absolutely understand people's need to have everything checked out medically, and you absolutely should. That's the first thing. But once you've had that and you've been given the kind of all clear from a medical perspective, is to read as much as you can, understand what is going on in the body from a mind-body perspective. Nobody is saying it's being imagined or it's purely caused by anxiety. Absolutely not. It's very real. It's physically happening in the body. Once you realize how much your autonomic nervous system is responsible for in terms of bodily processes, it makes perfect sense that it can affect so many different systems in the body. So that's the first thing, to feel empowered by the understanding and the knowledge of what's going on. And then the brain retraining is fantastic. So the concept of neuroplasticity and how the brain works, again, it's backed up by neuroscience, evidence research. It's not something we've plucked from the air. It's real and it happens. And once you realize the brain can change itself throughout the life course, that's again a very easy concept to understand. When you just think about your different habits, routines, things you've learned in life, it's exactly the same process. So knowing that you can help to decommission a neural pathway that is activating symptoms in response to certain triggers. So a brain retraining program is great if you are in a position to do that. But as I say, loads of things that are out there for free, such as the journal speak and how you can get a lot of relief from symptoms. So the emotional expression part is really, really key. Somatic tracking, I think, is a fantastic way to approach your experience of symptoms as they happen in the moment. And just having daily practices that help to calm the nervous system, so that you can help it on its way in moving out of chronic stress mode and into rest and repair. So anything that will help with vagal tone, so the vagus nerve type exercises, as I mentioned, meditation, deep breathing, whatever it is that you find that works for you, because I know not everybody can get on with certain ones, but once you've found something that brings you into that calm, relaxed state, then stick with that and make it a daily habit, not just while you're recovering, but for ongoing well-being for the life course, really. And I think the massive one, when you're thinking about what is my life going forward, is to make sure you're listening to the messages that you've received during this time about why did your nervous system want you to slow down and rest. What are the changes that would be helpful for you going forward in life? As I mentioned, life purpose is a big one for me, and I have changed jobs and have changed jobs again since then. I've moving towards the direction that I want to shape my own life in from a career point of view. I'm very much more aware of my key values, and as I said before, like when I feel stressed, I'm much more quickly picking up on those messages from the body, and I'm making sure that I am acting on them so that they don't become stuck and they don't end up sort of causing more issues down the line. So that's such an important one for people. You can't just, for me, recovery is not about returning to the life you had before. It's about making a new life, bringing in all of the things you've learnt, all the well-being practices, and living the way you want to. Because I always feel like illness is a message, and it's an opportunity to pause and reflect and say, what do we do differently from now? How can I honour my health and well-being going forward? So quite deep, really. A lot of messages there.
Thank you. That was amazing. What I'm going to do, you've mentioned various names like Nicole Sachs. You talked about somatic tracking. I will put a GUPTA program, lightning program. I will put some links on YouTube when I've uploaded this. So it's all out there. A lot of this stuff is out there for free. You don't need to pay for it. So have a look.
Thank you.